Today, we review the Samsung S95D QD OLED TV in the context of gaming. Yes, I know, finally. It is arguably the best gaming TV you can buy this year. Arguably, because LG fans will argue the G4 is a better gaming TV. So, at the end, we will compare them side by side, top to bottom, which one is the better gaming TV in 2024. So, what have I gotten myself into? Flame suit on, troll hat ready. Today's video is brought to you by Wukong. Trying to build a PC on a budget but don't know where to buy your Windows software cheaply? Wukong to the rescue. Use my coupon code SF20 and immediate discount with a free upgrade to Windows 11. At the bottom of this order where it says code card, to the right is the product key you need to activate Windows. So copy this long number, then go to the Windows menu and click on Settings. In the Settings menu at the bottom, select Update and Security. Select Activation, then select Change Product Key, paste what you copied from Wukong, click Next, click Activate, and you're done. You can buy Windows 11 Pro or Office 2019 Pro with my discount code SF20. Yes, I've been using Wukong for the last several years on my own PC builds and it just works. As this is my first deep dive into gaming TV settings, I'll limit my review to how these settings affect input lag and motion resolution or motion fidelity. And so remember, the S95D versus G4 comparison will be within this context. And since I will not be reviewing HGIG, color accuracy, HDR tone mapping, color saturation, and all of that stuff, shadow detail included, the G4 may very well prevail in those criteria. The game is Black Myth Wukong in high quality mode on the PS5. I know, what about the Xbox Series X? I'm going under the assumption they will both perform the same on the Samsung S95D because we're just playing with the TV's settings, not the console setting, right? The console setting on the PS5 is in its best high quality picture mode because again, we're not talking about color saturation, HDR, HGIG, any of that. It's purely how input lag is affected by these settings, and motion fidelity, motion resolution. Just those two things. And that's why I think it should be universally applicable to either the PS5 or the Series X. Now let's talk about the TV itself, the Samsung S95D. What we'll be examining is how the TV's game settings on the TV, not on the console, affects the S95D's image quality, motion resolution, and input lag. Now, how this is applicable to other Samsung TVs like the S90D, S90C, QN95D, right, the Neo QLEDs, or just the QLED non-OLED TVs, even though many Samsung TVs share similar settings like Game Motion Plus or Blur, Judder, BFI, Motion Clarity, whatever, right? Same labels. How they affect your gaming experience may be vastly different. Now, it may be applicable to similar TVs of similar technology, like we're on the S95D, maybe it's similar on the S95C or S90D, but I don't dare guarantee that will be exactly the same. So keep that in mind. On to the S95D TV settings. We are in game mode. VRR is off. Game Motion Plus is on level 2. Click on More Settings. Scroll down to Game Motion Plus settings. Blur reduction is 0. Judder reduction is 10. Clear motion or BFI is off. Now go to Game Picture Expert to turn on HGIG by setting Game HDR to basic. And we're off. Seeing these settings alone in a vacuum is not helpful. Why don't we add the other variations, all frame matched, and the variations are GMP or Game Motion Plus off, Blur 0, Judder 0, GMP on, Blur 0, Judder 0, and GMP on, Blur 10, Judder 10. Oh yeah, let's enjoy the differences. That was way too fast. I'm going to slow everything down to quarter speed so you can catch the differences in motion fidelity and image quality. See how blur reduction at 10 actually increases blur, right? By overlaying the next frame above the current frame, and you can reduce this degree of overlap by adjusting the blur between 0 and 10. Also notice, with GMP off, there's a noticeable flicker or flashing that's not there when it's on. This is only noticeable when I slowed everything down, but you may see it if you're sensitive to that kind of flickering, and definitely not as noticeable as black frame insertion or BFI. So if you notice this subtle flickering, you may want to turn on Game Motion Plus to see if that helps. After examining all the frames, it's obvious to me that this setting has the least amount of blurring effect. GMP on, blur 0, Judder 10, while blur 10 adds the most image overlap or blur. This appears to help when you game at lower frame rates like 4K 30 because it connects one frame to the next more smoothly without overlap. But at 4K 60, I didn't think it made a big difference. And it felt like I had the best motion fidelity with GMP on, blur 0, and Judder 10. However, does this affect the legibility of text? Let's check it out. Using this text right here, how easy is it to read in the various settings? Beginning with blur 10, Judder 10. Now, let's check it out. Clarity did not improve. Let's try reducing blur to 0 next. Not helpful without the other settings side by side. So let's compare the possibilities and add these other settings to compare. Too fast? Let's see what's happening frame by frame. It appears having Judder on 10 with GMP on makes the biggest difference, offering an overlap for the text, which may or may not make it easier to read. Whereas Judder 0 with either GMP on or off, the text does not blur or overlap between frames. What about BFI or clear motion? Let's turn it on and see. If you can put up with the flickering, text does appear a little bit clearer in motion. Does increasing Judder reduction to 10 do anything? Nope, I'd leave it off. And what exactly is BFI or black frame insertion? Slowing it down, you can see there is literally a black frame in between each other frame. This apparently makes text clearer. Now remember, BFI does dim down the TV quite a bit. However, in its brightest game mode, Clear Motion Enabled has similar brightness as the G4 in HGIG mode. Speaking of the G4, let's compare them side by side. I put the G4 in its best latency mode with Prevent Input Delay Boost on, while the S95D has GMP enabled in my preferred motion fidelity mode, blur 0, Judder 10. Let the comparison begin. Ooh, too fast. Let's slow it down a bit. The G4 has that slight flicker similar to when the GMP is off on the S95D. But looking at the text, the G4 is also using a type of Judder overlap like the S95D, but with less blurring. Now with GMP enabled on the Samsung, let's compare the input lag between the S95D and the G4. Before we compare the input lag of the S95D to the LG G4, a quick explanation about how we got to those measurements. First, this is relative measurement, meaning comparing the S95D to the G4. The G4 representing the benchmark for speed, right? This is not an absolute measurement. I am not plugging in a special latency measuring device using a special pattern. That's a completely different measurement. What I'm doing is using a real game, in this case Black Myth Wukong, on the two TVs, and then we will see how they respond to my triggers and then measure latency between the two TVs, with the G4 representing fastest, best in class for low latency, and that TV is in its lowest latency mode as the benchmark. So that way it will help you, the consumer, decide, I know the G4 has the lowest latency, but if I get the Samsung S95D, is the latency different? And if I change the image quality or the motion resolution with these settings, how does it affect input lag? And is it worth those changes for the differences in input lag, right? It helps the consumer make that decision. So, which takes me to the precision of these measurements. So, for me, it's very simple. I capture everything in 120 frames per second. Each frame represents about 8.3 milliseconds, right? So frame to frame, for example, if on the G4 in one frame, it shows a jump, and then on the S95D, it doesn't register that jump for maybe 2 frames later, right? That's a difference of 2 frames. That's about, well, it's over 8 milliseconds, right? Because each frame is 8 milliseconds. But on the second frame, it could be anywhere from 16 milliseconds up to 23 milliseconds, because that 8 millisecond tolerance is there. Going from the second to third frame, well, it's only 8 millisecond increments. So there is a tolerance of 8 millisecond inaccuracy or imprecision in this case. So you're gonna have to live with that. And that's why this is not for PC gamers. Why won't PC gamers like this? Because they pay hundreds, thousands of dollars for each additional frame per second, right? So to get an extra 10 FPS, they're paying an extra $1,000 for a better GPU, more cooling, right? They're pushing their CPUs to their maximum to get those extra 10 frame rates. And here I am throwing around 8 milliseconds like it's nothing. My friends, 8 milliseconds for them is a lot. So for PC gamers, take my review with a huge grain of salt, because I may be off by 8 milliseconds. But for console gamers, 8 milliseconds is not a big deal. But if you disagree, let me know in the comments below if 8 milliseconds is important to you. The G4 is 2 frames faster than the S95D, which indicates approximately 16 millisecond difference between the G4's fastest mode with prevent input delay boost on and Samsung with GMP enabled. The question is whether the additional input lag affects your gameplay. In real time, that difference is not noticeable, but slowing everything down, you can see that the S95D with GMP on is indeed slightly behind the G4. But what if we turned off Game Motion Plus? Will there be any latency differences between the S95D and the G4? With GMP off, notice that the S95D game bar shows input lag is at its fastest. Slowing everything down significantly, you see that both the G4 and the S95D react at the same time, frame to frame, with no lag separating the TVs. This tells me that they are at least within 8 milliseconds of each other at their lowest input lag game mode. Speeding up to where the text is visible, you notice that in this mode, both TVs have nearly indistinguishable motion resolution. Essentially, if you need the lowest input lag, either TV will do. Plus or minus 7 milliseconds. Another reason why I like to use games for my measurements and reviews and assessment is simply because TVs know when they're being measured with a special measuring pattern, and they've gamed the system very well. So, when you're sticking that special input lag tester that everyone uses, well, the TV knows that's an input lag tester. What does it do? It shuts everything down and does only one thing, input lag. And then you plug in a game. What does it do? Well, all the processing is back. And you're like, this is 12 milliseconds. What does it feel kind of laggy, right? Because there's no way for you to double check that what was on that test result is exactly what you're going to get in the game. So in this case, I'm using Black Myth Wukong as a real game, doing what I can to reflect what I see in game so that you can extrapolate, well, you know what, this is a real game. Maybe other games will benefit or be hurt by that setting in a similar way. So something to keep in mind. Conclusion. First of all, as you saw, the LG G4 as a comparison was set to its fastest, best latency mode, right? And that allows us to see, well, if we did this to the S95D, how does it affect latency? So clearly, you can get the S95D to match the G4 in terms of latency. Just turn off Game Motion Plus, but what do you give up? And you saw the differences, right? Ultimately, though, you have to ask yourself, it's all about options. Personally, I didn't see that lag as being noticeable. I mean, 16 milliseconds sounds like a lot, still very playable. I had no problems with it. More importantly, what did the smoothing or blurring feature do? I think that's very subjective for you, but at least you saw visibly what it does and how they did it, right? Overlaying the next frame on top of the last frame, or black frame insertion, the most clear way of getting you each frame. But there is that flicker you may or may not notice. It will give you the most clarity. But again, these are all tricks that the TVs do to try to get your eyes to see certain things to your preference. There's no right answer. What I like about the S95D is this. It gives you the option to have a fastest mode, right? That matches the G4 in its boost latency mode. Turn off Game Motion Plus. In game mode, you're there. But when I caught the frame rates, slowing it down a little bit, there is that slight banding flicker. You may or may not notice it, but it definitely drops the brightness a touch, just a touch. If you need maximum impact, maximum image quality, maybe turning on Game Motion Plus and giving up those 2 frames of latency, 16 milliseconds or more, right? Just above that maybe worth it to you. I think it's fine. I would leave it on. The question is whether you want the blur, right? All the way to 10, you saw major overlap, or keep blur off, have Judder on, or maybe Judder off, blur off, and just go straight up Game Motion Plus, nothing more. If you notice on the G4, you don't even have access to Judder or blur reduction, because in its fastest mode, they don't want any of that. No processing at all. And it's pretty impressive that at least with the Samsung, even though Game Motion Plus is off, you could still play with the Judder blur if you want that effect. But the reality is, I think both these TVs are phenomenal. So who wins? Who's the winner? I say if you're all about low latency and you don't care about anything else, it's a tie. I thought that the Samsung's HGIG mode, where I put it in basic, put it in static, it looks so similar to the G4. I mean, I take the S95D because we know for sure it has better color luminance. It'll have a higher color clipping point than the G4. It's a better looking TV overall, and its latency matches the G4 in its fastest mode. However, if you want more options open to you, Game Motion Plus being one of them, and trying that on games like on the Switch, where you might be at 1080p 30 and you want to see what it does, or a 4K 60 locked frame and see what it does to that, the Samsung gives you that option. So for variability of settings and maybe being more appealing to more people, I'd say the S95D wins for that. But if you're a pure performance player, they're both high-performing TVs if latency is all you care. It looks like a match, and if it's for more options, then I take the S95D, and of course, going into color and brightness is for another video. But let me know, are you satisfied with these results? Did it help you make a better decision? And if not, what other gaming criteria would you like me to look at besides HGIG, HDR, to mapping color accuracy? Until next time, my friends, hang loose and stop the FOMO.